talk about drifting and why things are the way they are from our points of view.
And how they are from our side of the fence.
So you want to introduce yourself? Who are you? Where you come from?
I'm Paul Harrison. I'm eating a cookie. I come from Calgary, Alberta, but I live in Nanaimo, BC now.
How long have you been driving for?
I've been driving since I got my license when I was 16, which was a long time ago. But I don't remember specifics ever, but drifting since like 2000, 2001 probably.
It's a good start.
It was good times back when it was easy.
Did you do anything else besides drifting?
I've done everything besides drifting. I wanted to be a rally car driver. I did lots of autocross stuff. I didn't have a lot of money, but I tried to do everything I could as far as track days or autocross stuff, but I used to just go and shred on the back roads for fun and try not to get in too much trouble.
It's hard to get in trouble in Calgary unless you tip over a cow, right?
Yeah, there's lots of places to hide. Lots of back roads with no people around.
What was your inspiration for the car you chose and the styling that you are currently at, where you started and where you are now?
I chose the car relatively by accident. If I had meant to get into drifting, I probably would have started with an 8.6 or an S13. Who knows if that was my intention. My intention was to go rallying, and my brother and I had just done a TSD, time speed distance rally course thing, instruction, and one of the instructors / old guys who was into rallying had a 72 Corolla that he was rallying, and it reminded me that I had seen exactly the same car in an alley not long before then. So my brother and I actually went and found the car in the alley, went and knocked on the door and talked the guy into selling us the car, because we were going to go rallying in it, because he was like, this guy can rally in it, he's a badass, we can make that work.
It has a very similar styling to a lot of the classic Group B sort of cars. They're very short, stubby.
Like old first-gen Escorts, like Mark 1, Mark 2 Escorts. I was already reading UK rally magazines forever, so it was something I already knew about, and I was like, this is about as close as I'm going to get in North America. Either a Datsun 510, this Corolla that I never knew existed, or like an old Mitsubishi Colt. There's like 4 or 5 options maybe of a lightweight, small, rear-wheel drive car to rally in, so...
What were your first mods to the car? Due to your... Because at the time you were doing a multitude of other interests of car stuff that drifting wasn't really on the radar necessarily.
At the time I was mostly really just obsessed. Both of my brother and I were both mostly just obsessed with skateboarding and snowboarding. But the first mods to the car was literally to paint it flat black, because it had a couple different color panels on it, and it didn't look so hot from sitting in an alley. We did an oil change, painted it flat black, aired up the tires that had been flat for probably 10 years, and road tripped it to Penticton. And at the time, I didn't know that the Speedo was in miles per hour, so we were going 90 everywhere.
Theoretically, hopefully.
We were flying everywhere. It's like, 100 miles per hour? No, that's 100K. What are you talking about?
So, from that point, walk us through what you started doing after that. How did you come to where you are now?
Really, I was looking for an LSD, and I went to a junkyard, and I met Chris Migallo, and he told me about Dorikaze, and then the internet. I didn't know what the internet was before then, really. I knew what it was, but I never used it. And then I went on and joined my first automotive forum and became friends with all these Corolla nerds. Found out that drifting was actually a thing that people did, not just driving sideways in a rally car. Because that's all I wanted to do, was drive sideways my whole life. Literally since I was like 4 playing cars, they were always going sideways. I didn't drive them straight. I was obsessed with oversteer for some reason. Whether it was Dukes of Hazzards or whatever it was when I was a kid.
Just an amusement car ride?
Yeah.
Just an amusement ride that you're in.
It's just so cool. Yeah, like the exuberance and fun that you could have going sideways, just how cool it looked with rooster tails shooting up behind the Dukes of Hazzard General Lee thing when they're doing donuts. It was just what I wanted to do.
Just using a box to do something else rather than get groceries and drive to and from the store.
Yeah, I was always obsessed with cars, so it's not like all of a sudden something that was like, hey, I like cars. I always wanted to do something with cars, but...
Where did that start from? Did it start from your family, like a brother or your dad, or...?
Yeah, my dad and his brothers had cool cars, like when I was in grade 3.
But did they also work on them as well? Or
Yeah.
they just simply owned a cool car that you enjoyed and you liked the fact that you could do different things to it other than just leave it stock or whatever?
It's kind of in between. Like, we didn't have a garage or a shop per se, but Dad randomly ended up with cool cars. He had a Mini that was super loud and super low and sparkly and hilarious when I was like 8 years old, and I loved that car until it got crashed and went away. But he had friends who would do his stuff for him probably, but I didn't know what was going on. He didn't modify cars necessarily, but he had just endless stories of him and his... I think there's 7 siblings in his family, so he had like 4 brothers, and just the stupid things that they would do when they were teenagers, driving in old Triumphs and old British cars, and just cheap, low-powered, dumb cars, and
Just going for drives.
just doing dumb stuff as teenagers. And his stories of hilariousness encouraged me to do silly things in cars.
So how did you get into working on cars? What was your mechanical, quote unquote, background? Were you in a trade? Did your dad do a lot of mechanics? Was he a welder? How did you learn welding? Did you do machining stuff? Like what your background with that, just to create the unique items that you have in your cars?
My dad was a carpenter, so he just did custom woodwork, but he was also mechanically inclined, but I don't recall ever, like, we didn't do mechanical stuff. Like, there wasn't like, I'm going to go help my dad do an oil change or anything like that. It was just as a young person. But then when I was 18 and I had my own car, the first thing I ever did was change a clutch in my Escort, front wheel drive Escort.
It's a big first job.
Out of necessity, basically, was like, well, I'm not paying a shop $1,000 to change the clutch in my $1,000 car. I could just buy another $1,000 car, but I really like this $1,000 car. So I bought a clutch kit for $120 or whatever it was, and my dad was like, yeah, we can do that. So we went down the rabbit hole of changing the clutch in the middle of the winter in Calgary. We had a garage at that point, at least. So I had an indoor spot to work, but yeah, pretty much after that, I became a tradesperson, did sheet metal, and started doing more. I learned a bit of welding at school and did a little bit of welding at work, and opportunities were opened up, and I ended up at a shop where we had a huge metal fabrication shop, and I had keys. I was allowed to go there and cut stuff and bend stuff and use their welders. And I made an exhaust for the Corolla not too long after I got it. I made a cool stainless steel exhaust out of fancy parts that I stole out of the scrap bin and made my own mufflers. Repurposed. I actually had the CNC table guy punch me out pieces that were 2-inch OD and the shape that I wanted. Had the right size hole for my pipe to go in, and then rolled up perforated metal and then made a box and stuffed it with ceramic wool, and then riveted the top on, like, made my own mufflers for the first version of my car.
Post that on Dorikaze? I swear I remember seeing that.
Way back, yeah. That was like 2002, 2003 kind of timeline.
Timeline is very important with this because it doesn't seem like a heck of a long time ago now, but in 2002 to 2019 now, kids that are showing up to the track weren't even born yet, and that's a really weird
that is concept. A hard concept. It's like, what?
I mean, it's the natural order of time of just simply passes and stuff, but to get your license and start, you have your first car there, and then you've been driving for those 16 or so years, however math works, and then you're sort of like all these different things that you learn, especially in a place where, I don't know how it is what was the motorsport scene in Calgary for all the different types of motorsports? What was it like to grow up in Calgary and have that culture around? Because it's a lot of, I would imagine, like hot rods and just car things, but not necessarily motorsports?
Well, I grew up in Ontario, so Calgary was, when I was 17, 18, we moved to Calgary. So, but Calgary's scene for cars was, I was introduced to the Volkswagen crowd, because a lot of the guys that worked at the skate shop that I hung out at, and my brother subsequently got a job and managed one of their stores for them. They were all Volkswagen air-cooled guys. So one of my first experiences going to a car show ever in my life was going to a stupid air-cooled Volkswagen show, and I hate Volkswagens with a passion now and always. But they inspired me to have the lowest, stupidest car ever, because basically those dudes just had Volkswagens that couldn't go over speed bumps, and they carried pieces of wood with them, and I was like...
Even back then?
Yeah, these cars, I was just like, these cars are amazing. This is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Like, how does a car this low even make it down the road? And just like, from then I was obsessed with low cars. Like, I already loved low riders from watching Cheech and Chong with my dad. Like, I just love... Cars look better low. It's just it is a fact. You can't change that fact. It will always be. Anything lower than stock ride height looks better.
Yeah.
So, the Volkswagen guys really started me down the path of like, normal people can do this? Like, these are just random dudes that I skateboard with, and they have these crazy cars?
Yeah.
And they're so low, and they're not necessarily fast, but then through other Volkswagen things and other, even through the skate shop, but also Volkswagen-y, my friend Elliot, who is still a great friend, but he was into water-cooled, so he had a GTI, and it was just a 16-valve GTI, but it was insanely fast to me at the time. 200 horsepower 16-valve GTI is really fast. Right. Yeah, it's a quick car for 1998 or 1999 when I met Elliot, and he had that car. Like, that thing was fast. I'd never been in a quick car before. Like, my dad's Mini had a 998cc engine, like less than a liter. It's not fast. It was cool, but it was about as fast as those air-cooled Volkswagens.
So from there, how did drifting start for you in Calgary?
Drifting started basically after I got the Corolla, met Chris at the junkyard, he told me what drifting was essentially. I was just rallying and loved the idea of going sideways on gravel. Didn't really comprehend that it was doable on pavement. But then after a few years of fiddling around with my Corolla, the Corolla that is green is my third TE27 Corolla. So the first one was too rusty to continue with, so I found another back. I bought it from Vancouver on eBay actually, and it was actually, when I got there and got it, it was way worse than the one that I had before, but it was just well hidden because someone had bondoed it up and painted it before. But I bought it online and ended up there, and it was terrible, but I had already paid for it, so I drove it home. And then I found another one, and that's the one that is the car now, which was pretty solid and unmodified and had rust because it's old and terrible, but it was pretty good and it was workable.
How long have you had that chassis for?
That car, I believe I brought home around Christmas of 2001. Pretty sure that's when I brought it home. I have the bill of sale somewhere, and I'm pretty sure it's December 2001.
Does it need to be specific?
And then that car, basically, I drove it home and pulled it into the garage. My brother and I were renting a house, and we had a pretty sweet garage out back. And basically pulled it home, took it apart right away. Like that project instantly began. I already had a focus of where I wanted to go, and it was fast road car / track car kind of thing, but it wasn't... I knew what drifting was, but I wasn't like into it. I was like, I'm going to build a car that I can go hit the back roads, that I can drive around. It'll be cool, it'll be rad. I know the Corolla now for a couple of years. It'll be a sweet thing It was turned into a very long-term project, though, because other things happened in between. But eventually got it on the road, and then once it was driving, went to a drift practice. We didn't call them events in Calgary. Wednesday nights was drift practice. Every Wednesday, pretty much at Race City, we ripped around the oval, mostly the infield. The cool guys with lots of power would try and do the banks. Every week there was a skyline written off. Pretty much every single drift day there was a new guy who showed up in the skyline. It was like, my car is the best! Yeah. And he would go straight into the concrete wall.
What year was that? roughly?
When Skylines were new?
Because I feel that's when like
Probably.
the Lethbridge guys were starting to do
It
that
was.
stuff.
Well, they were already well into drifting, and they were the guys who were actually able to do it, so everybody else saw Skyline drifting. I would say it was 2005 or 6.
Is that Van Galen?
Yeah, because Chris was actually pretty good. He had the power to pull off the bank, whereas a lot of guys would show up in a stock GTST and think that they were going to Van Galen it around the bank. Yeah. Didn't work so well.
No, I remember a few of those. And it seems to be, it was a common thread at the time of these Skyline. It's a weird concept of how, it's sort of how the Corolla and 240 thing was. It's like, it's ready to drift, and regardless of your experience knowing that it isn't, it's just the fact that people have a different perception. It's the initial D sort of mentality of just getting in the car, it can drift. It's just either you do it or you know, some magic happens or whatever. It's a really weird time, and I don't know how it was in Calgary, but it's the learning stages of what a car does, like a clutch kick, a e-brake, you know, shift locking, weight transfer, flicks, all those weird different ways to get it drifting.
Yeah.
So what was the original color of your Mango that you have now?
It's been green ever since I've driven it. When I pulled it into the garage, it was red.
When you bought it?
When I bought it, it was red. I pulled it into the garage, literally stripped all the paint off of it on the body side. I didn't do a lot of the interior and the inner wheel wells and stuff, but basically we stripped it right down to a shell. I fixed the rust. I figured out where my flares were going to go, and then I can't remember if we trailered it. We probably just dollied it over to my shop where I worked, and
you flared it.
Elliot sprayed
the first
it.
Time?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's been fender flares since before I ever drove it. Even the first Mango had, like, the fiberglass fenders, I still have them out back, that were on the front, were built by a super OG guy named Gary, who built the first Mango that I found in an alley. He built it in the early 80s as his daily driver / autocross car, because it had dual Webers and a built motor, and it's not an SR5, but it had this super rare 10-bolt SR5 6.7 rear end in it, so a GTS LSD just fit right in it, and 430 gears were just bolted straight in, so it had tons of cool upgrades that were very easily attainable for me.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's lots of weird stuff with that car. It was an amazing find. We paid $1,500 for it. It seemed like a lot of money to me and my brother, but it began this journey that my life has turned into, and it's just been pretty excellent.
How long were you drifting in Calgary before you changed direction with drifting?
I drifted in Calgary for a long time, it feels like, before I changed direction, if you want to call it that.
Did you ever do DMC?
Yep. I drove D Sport at the end of D Sport, which was Andrew Moschuk's thing, which was our local thing that was available to us. He organized all the events and did lots of hard work. And then I think D Sport, when I decided to do competition, because we were allowed to tandem, we were allowed to drive door to door at Race City until something happened and they found out what we were doing. Basically, someone came by and was like, "What are you idiots doing? Like, this is not what we agreed to." And so we were no longer allowed to tandem unless someone rented the track and paid for competition insurance, and then we were allowed to drive door to door. So we weren't allowed to tandem at practices anymore. Like, back when I first started and I was just learning how to drift, we were doing like 10-car trains all the time. We were 20-30 feet apart, but it was hilarious, and we were having a grand old time. And then our practices became single car runs, and it sucked. So the only time you were allowed to do tandem anymore was in competition. So it was like, well, I guess now. And then with that came roll cages, fire extinguishers, driver suits, better helmets. Like, so everybody had to step their game up. And that was at the time when everybody was like, we all want to be pros. I know there was a big thing like Alberta versus BC. There was like the big battle, and that was probably 2005, 2006, whereas like Alberta wanted to be pros, and BC was like, why are you guys such a bunch of losers? Just have fun. And we were like, no, we're better than you. We've got money. Look at our roll cages.
Well, that was a different time, though, because BC, at that time, Cap D didn't exist, so the island stuff didn't exist at all. I think there was like sporadic stuff.
It was like Rio Verde and...
Well, he
Because
sort
Rio
of
was
did.
coming to our stuff. He came to DMCC.
Yeah, it was a weird transitionary period. So all the mainlanders we had.
Scremin and Kohei.
Originally in BC, it started out with VDS, Vancouver Drift Society, and that was run by Cannonball, a very horrible, shady shop that was the mainland's first introduction to JDM anything.
Yeah.
So previous to this, the majority of us just knew it from option videos. So those of us who were even remotely aware of Japanese culture, that's where our inspiration came from. And unbeknownst to myself, like in my community, there was like 2 of us in high school that were sort of into drifting, and there was like Club 4AG, and that was like when the California drift scene was like in its infancy with the drift days. And then so with BC, there was no pro anything. There's drivers. Okay, so for VDS, it started out at Boundary Bay, which is, for those who don't know, it's in Delta Sawasan sort of area. It's just a airplane scratch pad. It's super lumpy, full of cabbage, and it was on the outsides of the rectangle. It was this huge drop off. So in this time, it was very under the table sort of insurance. They wouldn't allow you if you had a crack in your windshield to drive, which is why I didn't start there, because I was too cheap to put a windshield in my car. Well, mostly because I was furious at the fact that he told me that my windscreen would crack in half and it would split in half and it would cut my head off during mid drift or something. I was like, your
like,
science is incorrect.
You're crazy,
yeah, you're stupid. Here, take my $100 or whatever it was. And so I didn't do that. So at that time, that's when some of the Washington guys were coming up. Like Rob Primo came up here quite a few times in his Novin S14 with an SR and stuff. And like Cannonball's cars, they had Advan livery, 180SX, and FD, like a RFD RX-7, and it was a wild car. It was like a little taste of Japan that we've never seen in person before. Everyone there had clapped out 240s and Corollas painted flat black, terrible sized wheels. This is even before replica wheels. It was just simply maybe some mesh wheels you found at the junkyard or something, or diamonds. Diamonds were a huge thing. Yeah, because they're big dishy things. They weigh 50 pounds each.
Yeah, 13 by 10, -80 diamonds. Just hack your fenders to death.
So in that time, I was the typical mainlander where I had a 240 that was lower on coilovers and had R33 GTR wheels spaced out. Did everything but motors. I was still stock motor and stuff. So it was just the mainland mentality of just simply style over function necessarily. Because at that time, a lot of us didn't know what we were doing. It was a mainland mentality of clutch click or nothing, e-brakes are for losers, stuff like that. So that is getting back to the original point. Like BC didn't have like any sort of competition cars. There were like sporadic amount of people. I think this is where Brody Gogol started out with his S13 forever ago, and I saw some old videos of him at Western before any of our drift programs were there. I think he just like rented it out or something. And Rio had his own like little thing up in Saratoga. I think he started to come. I think he came down to Western for a couple things or something. But at that time, the BC drivers were non-existent. Like this was all Alberta money. So I met a lot of the Lethbridge guys on a trip there to go see my friends Model and Monks, and those two were highly connected with a lot of. And Lethbridge is a very small town, and everyone knew each other. So I met Van Galen and Rob Parsons before his accident, and who else is there? There's David and Jordan and just a bunch of guys that had. This is when right-hand drives were first coming out too.
Well,
so we had
like Steve Gronick and like he was the Corolla guys back
Yeah.
and Muddle and
I met Steve on a bunch of different trips to FD. I didn't meet him on that particular trip. I was there for a week or something with Muddle, and we just did night drift. It's such a small town that you could just go out and do anything you wanted, and all these cars were at that time were like 400 horse. Like at the average car there had like 400 horse, like fully built cars, and had all the bells and whistles. They looked good as well. They're all painted one color, aesthetically pleasing cars to look at. And so, getting back to the original point, was this? Yeah, it was a huge animosity between it because we had dummies in BC with their non-driving one event, which was on a skid pad that was bumpy and stuff, and no one was teaching each other. Everyone was just fending for themselves. And then you have Alberta, which they built their full cars, which is very FD lineage, and they had Race City. You had actual tracks to go to, and it was a huge disparity in actual quality of drivers as well as quality of cars as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, after so what happened in Calgary with Race City?
I don't know. When did it shut? 2008? 7 or 8? It shut once, and then it shut again, and then they opened it, and then...
Did you guys have any other drift venues to go to?
Not in Calgary. We had basically a couple years of DMCC, and even then I competed for a year or two, and then I blew up my car and bought a house around that time, and then stopped competitively drifting while I built an engine and got used to having a house. And then DMCC was there by then, and it was run out of Quebec, and there was lots of animosity because it seemed like Quebec had all this money, but their events were being attended by 10,000 plus people, whereas in Calgary we could barely get our pit crews to go. Like, as a driver, you were pretty much paying for your pit crew to come watch because it's just your buddies. So it was like, it was definitely hard for DMC to make money. They had a business model and whatnot, and they sent judges and prize money and pretty well organized events. And like Ryan Lantang came and judged at our stuff.
Who's that?
Like, he's an FD judge. He's
okay.
Lantang's rad, but him and Tony Angelo came to events as like guest judges and judged. I did speed scores and stuff with Ryan Lantang one time, because when I wasn't competing, I was helping. I would usually show up at the event and volunteer and either be a cone guy running and grabbing cones, or doing whatever, running the start lines, just helping out where we can. And then Race City shut down, and basically there was nowhere to drift in Calgary anymore, so it was Edmonton trips, which is 3 hours away. Eventually, before I left Calgary, there was some airport stuff going on, like World War II practice landing strips and stuff that someone's parents bought.
Koei went up to that. The BC guys went to that, didn't they? That facility?
One of the earlier ones. There was a couple, and there's been a couple over the years, but basically they just keep getting shut down by the small towns and townships that they're in, because
noise.
They don't want kids drifting where they're trying to do airplane things, even though they're inactive, and people buy up all the old hangars to store stuff, and then they don't want people around, so they just kept shutting it down, being annoying, blaming everything on... They're blaming all the donuts, all the intersections with burnout marks and donut marks and burnout marks on the people drifting, and blah 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 blah, and yeah, basically it became a scapegoat, and they shut everything down. That was a bit painful, but that was near the end for me before I basically gave up on local drifting and started just driving millions of hours to go drive with what became ShaDynasty.
So how did ShaDynasty start for you? How did that transaction change? Because it's a huge shift from driving in Cowtown to going to estates, and then also high profile states events as well.
Yeah, it was an interesting transition. It was mostly Race City dying. I was never interested in having a super high power or like long wheelbase big car. Like, I've always been obsessed with small light cars. I don't want the ideal... At that point, I think someone had mentioned somewhere on the internet, the ideal wheelbase for a drift car is 98 to 99.9 inches or something insane.
Okay.
And FD was saying, like, FD drivers and FD teams were basically like 3,500 pounds is the ideal weight for a 700 horsepower drift car running a 285 tire. Like, that's the ideal power, weight, and tire size. That was before, or right around the time the FD tire rule came in, which was whatever year that was. But everybody was starting to swap to V8s and have big power. I was semi-competitive with a 150 horsepower carbed 3TC in my car. I could keep up and have fun, but it just became everybody wanted big power and big tires and trying to go fast, and it wasn't that fun for me to compete anymore, so I was looking for other ways to have fun. And around that time it was after I bought my place and took a year off to build my motor, and then it blew up right away, and then I was like, well, screw it, I'm going to do this Beams 3S GE fanboy motor that no one is doing, because it's...
Well, it can't be fanboy if no one's doing it.
Well, no, it was like the internet fantasy motor, because everybody wanted the 2-liter 200 horsepower Toyota engine. The only rear-wheel drive version of a 2-liter 16-valve Toyota ever made. It was like this motor that we all had heard about and thought Beams was like some aftermarket tuning company. We had no idea what it was when it first, like, someone first found a picture of it and was like, whoa! And then around that time, there was a dude named Andrew in California. 10,000 Assassins, I think, was his internet name back then. He did a Beams with ITBs, and it was because the ECUs had finally caught up. Aftermarket ECUs could run the dual VVTi and do all the things, and I think he was running a Link ECU, and Adaptronic out of Australia had an option. And then I didn't know this, but at the same time, Matt Panic, who had been drifting in Seattle area for a long time in S13s, and he had an 8.6 with a 20 valve, and then he scrapped the 8.6 and put all his 20 valve drivetrain into a old Celica, a 73 Celica.
Well, there's two
Celica,
Corollas.
since we're in Canada recording this.
Well, that's a little bit longer story.
It is a much longer story. This is a compressed version, but basically around exactly the same day, Matt and I both decided that we were going to put Beams engines in our early 70s Toyotas. And then Steve Gronick, who is a member of the first gen Celica forum, was like, Paul, you need to talk to this Matt dude. He's doing what you're doing. And we messaged on Dorikazi, I think, once or twice, and then he actually suggested strongly that I join Facebook so we could communicate easier. Mm-hmm. And I had already known that Matt existed because of the internet. There was PGP events, and I had seen him drifting the blue Celica at PGP, and my plan was to get my car ready and the next year trailer my car out there and just show up at PGP and meet Matt and drift with him, because I was like, we need to drift together. And then that was exactly the same time PGP got shut down and no more drifting was allowed, and it was like, oh man, so this isn't gonna happen. And eventually it did happen, which I think was 2004. No, what time is it now? 2014?
No, we're quite a bit away.
Was 2014 the first time I went to Portland?
That would make sense in a timeline, I think.
Yeah, I think it was 2014.
That makes sense, I think.
I think 2014 was the first time I went to Portland, and Matt and I talked on the internet, and he was like, well, this event is 2 days, it's at Park, it's similar to PGP, it's super fun, I drive there all the time, we'll put you up, all you have to do is show up, I have friends and family in town, and we can park our cars, and it's all good, just show up, man, and it'll be fun. So I got myself down there. Around the same time I had a back injury, so I had to part out my 8.6 and all these horrible things to pay for the trip. And then I went to Portland, and it was super, super fun. The track was amazing. Everybody, the whole crew that was around Excessive, because there's a house right across the street between Matt and his brother Mark, and then Mitch and Justin and Angela, Rich and Ryan at Excessive. The whole crew of people were just so friendly and amazing that it was quite the experience for me. Very different than competition life in Canada and being like pretty cliquey and divided. It was
Alberta.
Like Alberta. Yes, I was instantly accepted. And I think before this, about 9 months before I went in the fall. I came to Cap D and I came to Pumpkin Bash. That was the first time Pumpkin Smash. That was the first time I drifted the Mango with the beams in it.
That was 2014, because that's the last. That was the year I drove the Supra.
Yeah,
and that's when we quote unquote drove together at that time. Both fucked up our alternators in a big puddle.
Yeah, that was the giant puddle.
Yeah.
Yes.
Don't do 360s through a puddle.
They're fine. Yes, because you left shortly. You left early, and then I didn't drive at all on the
I had
Sunday.
to source an alternator so I could drive it home.
The second day I couldn't drive at all because my car was waterlogged and no alternator. And that was the beginning of my traveling, really. I bought a truck and I had borrowed a trailer to go to Pumpkin, but I got a trailer. I had my own trailer by the time I went to Portland. And because that was what I was planning on doing, was coming to BC, going to Penticton or Victoria and doing like the DUI events and the Pumpkin Bash Smash. Some mega Pumpkin Smash stuff and just having fun in my drift car. And then Portland ended up being so ridiculously fun and such a good time that it became a thing that I thought was viable or acceptable to do, to drive 15 hours each way and sleep in my truck. And I figured out how to do it as cheap as possible. I basically do not stay in hotels. I sleep in the backseat of my truck. I crash on people's floors. I buy groceries. I live off of trail mix and water.
Yeah.
Like,
helps to have a supporting pseudo family as well to be able to.
It was amazing to show up and just have someone's couch to sleep on and have a shower and just have like all of a sudden a group of friends. Really, like everybody accepted me so fat. Like instantly, I felt like I was best friends with 10 people that I just met, and it was such a good time. Like I drove back, and driving back, I was like massaging my face because it hurt from smiling so much from having such a good weekend. And it was at a time when my life wasn't that fantastic leading up to. I was not that stoked on stuff, and so it was a huge change point in my life, from going from like, this is my terrible life, to like, I can achieve greatness.
there's some light over here.
Yeah, so it just was a great change of pace for what had become super mundane for me.
Ironically enough, I think, because Matt and I were both on Zip Diet at the time, and I think he was talking about a bunch of stuff. I was like, hey, my friend Paul here in Alberta, he's doing this. Go check it out. Go talk to him. Because this is when forums had really cool builds where people were building. It wasn't a self-fellatio thing. It was just simply, this is what I'm doing.